The Vorak were a species built for conquest. Their bodies stood 8 feet tall, covered in thick gray fur that could stop a blade. Their claws could tear through ship hull plating. Their teeth had evolved over millions of years to crush bone and metal alike. Every generation of Vorak cubs was trained from birth in the arts of war. They learned to kill before they learned to speak. They practiced combat formations before they could properly walk. The Vorak had conquered 17 star systems through pure military strength, and their cubs were their greatest weapons. Commander Thralvex stood at the observation window of the breeding station, watching the newest batch of cubs tumble over each other in the training pit below. 53 cubs, all between the ages of 3 and 5 cycles, learning to fight and bite and scratch. This was how it had always been done. This was how warriors were made. But something had changed in the past cycle, and Thralvex could not understand it. The human had arrived 11 months ago. His name was Marcus Chen, and he was a prisoner of war from the failed invasion of Earth. The invasion had been a disaster that no Vorak commander wanted to discuss. Humans were supposed to be weak. Their bodies were soft. They had no claws, no fangs, no natural armor, and yet somehow, impossibly, they had driven back the Vorak fleet with technology and tactics that the Empire had never encountered before. Marcus was one of the few humans captured during the retreat, and the High Council had sent him to the breeding station as an experiment. They wanted to understand how such a weak species could produce such effective warriors. Thralvex had objected to having a human near the cubs. It seemed dangerous and foolish. But the council had insisted, and so Marcus was given a small room in the facility and allowed to observe the training sessions. At first, he simply watched in silence, his strange flat face showing emotions that Thralvex could not read. Then, slowly, he began to interact with the cubs during their rest periods. The first time it happened, Thralvex nearly had Marcus executed. A young cub named Kira had wandered away from her combat drills and found Marcus sitting alone in the courtyard. Instead of attacking him as her training demanded, she had sat down beside him and stared. Marcus had looked at her for a long moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small red ball. He had bounced it gently on the ground and rolled it toward her. Kira had never seen anything like it. The Vorak did not have toys. They had training weapons and combat simulators and nothing else. She picked up the ball with her claws, careful not to puncture it, and examined it with wonder in her golden eyes. Then Marcus made a gesture with his hands, opening and closing them, and she understood somehow that she was supposed to throw it back. She did, and he caught it, and he smiled at her with those strange human teeth that were too small and too white. That was the beginning. Within weeks, every cub in the facility knew about the human and his games. They would finish their combat training as quickly as possible so they could spend time with Marcus in the courtyard. He taught them things that had no place in Vorak society. He taught them to play catch with the red ball. He taught them a game called hide and seek, where they would cover their eyes and count while others found hiding spots. He taught them to build towers out of scrap metal and see who could make the tallest one before it fell down. The training masters were furious. They reported to Thralvex daily about the declining aggression in the cubs. Young warriors who should have been learning to tear out throats were instead learning to share resources and take turns. Cubs who should have been fighting for dominance were instead cooperating to build things. It was unnatural. It was dangerous. It went against everything the Vorak believed about strength and survival. But Thralvex noticed something else. The cubs who played with Marcus were faster. They were more creative. They worked together in ways that traditional combat training had never produced. During a standard raid simulation, a group of Marcus-trained cubs had achieved their objective in half the expected time. Not because they were more aggressive, but because they communicated with each other. They made plans. They trusted each other enough to take risks that lone wolves would never attempt. Thralvex decided to watch more closely. Marcus had a way with the cubs that no Vorak had ever mastered. He did not demand respect through violence or fear. He earned it through patience and kindness. When a cub named Torin failed to catch the ball and became frustrated to the point of tears, Marcus did not mock him or punish him. Instead, he sat down beside the young Vorak and showed him a simpler technique. He broke the motion down into smaller steps until Torin could do it on his own, and when Torin finally succeeded, Marcus celebrated with him as though it were the greatest victory in the universe. The cubs began to change, not just in their training scores, but in their personalities. They laughed more. They shared food with each other instead of fighting over it. They gave each other names beyond their designation numbers, names that they chose themselves based on things they liked or wanted to be. Little Kira started calling herself Star Jumper because she loved looking at the stars through the observation windows. Torin became Thunderpaw because of how loudly he stomped when he ran. The training masters wanted Marcus removed. They filed formal complaints with the High Council, demanding that this corrupting influence be eliminated before it spread further. But the reports also reached other ears. Military analysts noticed that the cubs from Marcus's station were consistently outperforming cubs from traditional programs. Not in individual combat, where old-style training still produced the most brutal fighters, but in everything else. Strategy, teamwork, adaptability, problem-solving. The Vorak had conquered 17 systems through brute force, but they had also lost Earth. They had lost because humans did not fight the way Vorak expected. Humans fought with creativity and cooperation and technology that required groups to work together instead of apart. And now, for the first time in Vorak history, cubs were learning those same skills through something as simple as a red ball and a game of catch. 6 months after Marcus arrived, the council sent an observer to the breeding station. Her name was High Counselor Vex, and she was the oldest and most respected member of the ruling body. She had seen 100 generations of cubs trained for war. She had watched the Vorak Empire rise from a single planet to a galactic power. And she had also witnessed the disaster at Earth, where everything the Vorak believed about warfare proved wrong. Vex spent 3 days watching Marcus with the cubs. She saw him organize a race where the cubs had to carry eggs without breaking them. She watched him teach them a human song with strange words that made no sense, but had a rhythm that made the cubs bounce with happiness. She observed a moment where 2 cubs got into a genuine fight over a toy, and Marcus stepped between them not with force, but with gentle words and an offer to find a solution that made both of them happy. On the 4th day, Vex called Thralvex to her chambers. The commander expected punishment. He had allowed this human to corrupt an entire generation of warriors. He had failed in his duty to produce soldiers for the Empire, but when he entered Vex's chambers, she was not angry. She was sitting quietly with her eyes closed, and when she opened them, Thralvex saw something he had never seen in a High Counselor before. He saw uncertainty. Vex asked him a simple question. She asked what the Vorak were fighting for. Thralvex answered as any warrior would. They fought for conquest. They fought for resources. They fought for the glory of the Empire and the survival of their species. Vex nodded and asked another question. She asked what happened after they won. Thralvex had no answer. The Vorak did not think about after. They thought only about the next battle, the next conquest, the next enemy to destroy. Their entire civilization was built on war because war was all they knew. But what was the point of conquering the galaxy if there was nothing left when they were done? Vex told Thralvex a secret that only the High Council knew. The Vorak Empire was dying, not from external enemies, but from within. Their population was declining because cubs raised only for war did not form families. Their technology had stagnated because warriors did not become scientists. Their conquered worlds were in constant revolt because the Vorak did not know how to govern, only how to destroy. In 3 generations, perhaps 4, the empire would collapse under its own weight. But these cubs, these strange new warriors who played games and built towers and gave themselves silly names, they were different. They formed bonds. They created things. They wanted futures beyond the next battle. For the first time in Vorak history, cubs were dreaming of what they might become instead of what they might kill. Vex ordered the training program changed, not abolished, because the Vorak still needed warriors in a dangerous galaxy, but altered. Marcus would be given official status as a training specialist. His methods would be studied and implemented across all breeding stations. The cubs would still learn to fight, but they would also learn to play. They would learn that strength came in many forms, and that the strongest packs were the ones that cared for each other. Marcus was called before the High Counselor to be told of his new role. He stood in the great chamber where enemies of the Empire were usually executed, surrounded by warriors who could tear him apart in seconds. And he asked only one question. He asked if he could bring more toys. The cubs of the new generation grew up different from their parents. They still had claws and fangs and bodies built for war. They could still fight when fighting was necessary. But they also knew games. They knew cooperation. They knew that victory meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. When they became adults and took their place in Vorak society, they brought those lessons with them. The Empire began to change. Conquered worlds were governed instead of simply occupied. Scientists were valued alongside warriors. Art and music and literature appeared for the first time in Vorak culture, clumsy at first, but growing more sophisticated with each generation. The population stabilized, then grew. Former enemies became trading partners when the Vorak learned that cooperation could bring more wealth than conquest. And on every Vorak world, in every training station and military academy and family home, children played games with red balls and built towers and hid while others counted. They called these games by their human names, and they taught them to their own cubs, and they remembered the soft, strange creature who had shown them that strength was not just about destruction. Marcus Chen lived out his days on the Vorak homeworld, honored as a teacher and advisor. He never returned to Earth, but he wrote letters to his family that were delivered by Vorak diplomatic ships once relations with humanity were established. His great legacy was not any single lesson or game, but a simple truth that the mightiest warriors in the galaxy had failed to learn on their own. The truth that there is no victory worth having if you lose yourself in the winning. The Vorak still trained for war. They still had the claws and the fangs and the bodies built for conquest. But their cubs now knew something more. They knew that the strongest pack was not the one that destroyed all others, but the one that found reasons to put down their weapons and play.